Dive into extending the new issue view with Atlassian Connect and Jira. In this talk, how to extend the new issue view in Jira Cloud, we'll learn how to extend the new issue view as well as learn about future improvements that are planned. Now, we saved our best speaker for last, no pressure. A principal product manager at Atlassian and joining us from Sydney, Australia. Please join me in welcoming Taylor Pekacek.
Cool, thanks. All right, cool. Let's get started. Last talk of the day, and then we can go out and kind of gamble, get some drinks, have some fun. So I'm going to dive into how to actually extend the issue view within Jira Cloud, something we've been working on for a couple of years now, about a year and a half. And so let's dive into this topic. So the agenda we're going to cover is really kind of what are Jira issues, what does it mean to actually extend those, why would you actually want to do this in the first place, and then we'll really dig into how you would actually go about doing this, right? That's kind of the meat of the talk here. And then we'll give a quick recap. There's quite a bit of content I'll be flying through, and so we'll cover that at the end. All right. So what are Jira issues exactly? I think the best way to think about this is that they're essentially building blocks for any Jira project, and they represent any discrete unit of work. So we have many software teams using it to track bugs, software development tasks. You could also do incidents, or maybe even requests. It's pretty much a number of different ways that you can capture work, move that through a workflow in the context of a project, right? Next slide. So when we think of the issue view itself, it does sit in between a couple of different things within Jira itself. And so at the bottom layer, that blue piece you see is the global navigation. And this kind of sits across products. It's very Atlassian-wide. Started to move to the architecture here. On top of that is the project setting. So that's really kind of getting into your boards. Going in and out. Yep. I don't know, is it in and out? Yeah, cool. Wait for this to turn on, is it? Yeah, definitely. OK, cool. Back on. Yeah, so great. So the middle layer that we're talking about is the project context, right? So this is where you would see things like your board, your backlog, or maybe you're searching through issues within that project context. And then on top of that is the actual issue detail view. And there's a couple other different features here, but the issue really sits inside that project level. And you can view this across the backlog when you're planning, the board, for example, and a number of different locations, right? So if we take a look at that, if you're clicking on an issue on a board, say you're on a Scrum board or a Kanban, you're going to load the modal here, which is the new issue view. You're going to see this in the backlog. It's nice and responsive, so you can open that up. We also have it in the issue navigator. And then lastly, the full issue page, which is one of the most popular spots in Jira to come and work on something. And it's where a lot of the notifications will take somebody. And lastly, we also have it on the mobile web view. This is slightly different than the native mobile apps we have. But the point is that we've created this new issue view to be a common component across the entire Jira family of products, right? And so this means as an app developer, you can build once and extend this once, and it's going to work across all of these different contexts, which is really nice. So it is the same underlying issue detail view, and therefore it works across all of that, which is a really, really cool advantage. So let's look at some examples of how this actually works. First one I want to show off is a really nice integration by InVision, where they're using the content area in the issue view to show additional pieces of information around a prototype that really helps describe the work that you're trying to achieve. And they have a little iframe here that they're extending, and you have a couple of different options to look at that. Maybe click in and go check that out inside InVision. Another really good use case is Tempo, where you're able to log time against an issue and create essentially a work log. And so they have this activity feed where, similar to how we have the comments feed or the history within native Jira functionality, they have another option there with work logs, and they essentially are rendering an iframe, and that's going to pull down all of the activity feed. So you want to be mindful of how you design that. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, a little bit of contextual information. There's a nice little checklist plugin that allows you to open this checklist item, and you can, if you don't want all of the heavy lifting of subtasks, for example, you can just have a nice little checklist. Kind of that's an iframe. You can kind of tick those off, add some more, while still looking at all the content on the left-hand side and all of the comments maybe going on. So that's a couple different ways that you can extend this, and we're going to dive into how you would actually start to build these things. But before I get to that, I want to convince you of like why this would be a good idea, and then we can dive into how you're actually going to do it. Cool. So here's a customer quote. If it isn't being tracked in Jira, the work doesn't really exist. Jira helps the entire team stay coordinated and hit our goals. And the key piece there is this idea of coordination, right? You have this Jira issue that pulls in a bunch of different roles and tools and allows you to collaborate on that work as it moves through its workflow. And so when you're building for this and you're extending the issue view, you want to be really mindful around adding that extra context and helping people coordinate that across different roles. So the next thing I want to look at is the old issue view, which we're still in the process of rolling this out completely, so this does still exist in some areas. But you can see here that we did a lot of research. We were looking at this, and the old issue view itself, when we looked at all of the different pieces of information that were drawn across the page, it was really, really like disparate and not really organized very well. This is because Jira itself had evolved over time to handle a wide number of different use cases. So teams were just starting to use it in all types of different ways, and so the information architecture itself grew organically. We never really took a step back to look at that. And so that's what we did with the new issue view, was we kind of started to condense this information and make it much more easy to also think about, for users to understand across the different products, while still making it flexible enough to handle use cases across Jira software and maybe inside your queues or a service desk inside that product, right? So you have these main pieces. You have the content, which describes the work. You have the context, which is going to help add additional pieces of extra information there. You have your activity feed. And at the top, you have kind of your issue actions and the status being very important as it makes its way through the workflow. So ultimately, this is what we landed with the design. And from the day one, like we've actually been thinking about this, of how we would allow ecosystem to extend this. It was very much of something we thought about from day one when we were designing this. It's really cool. So let's dive into what we're actually optimizing for. So these are some of the design choices that we made. It's always a game of balance. It's always a game of trade-offs. And so this is what we chose to do, and you should be thinking about this when we dig into actually building the apps and extending the issue. The first one is being key actions. And I'll come back to this a little later. But we wanted to make key things that people are doing every single time, right? Changing the assignee, changing the status through the workflow, making a comment. Those are now front and center and make it really, really easy to perform those actions. The second thing is around focus. And this is a huge shift from the old issue view to the new in the context of ecosystem. So the old issue view, we had customers complaining a lot about how many iframes were displayed that were empty and just taking up space. People would install an app globally. It would be on every single issue detail view, and the iframe would just become overwhelming as you had about maybe 4 or 5 apps installed. And so we had the same problem with fields as well. You have a whole bunch of different fields that you would have available, but many of them not really actually filled out. And so what we wanted to do was actually allow people to focus on what matters. And so if you actually have content for that field or that iframe, wherever you're doing to extend the issue, you want to display that. Otherwise, you want to keep it hidden and allow people to get to that information. So the attachment panel is a good example of something native in Jira, where in the new issue view, there is no attachment panel box anymore. It's only when you add an attachment for the first time. Through this little quick add icon, you just tap the attachments, pops open your little selector, and then it will render the attachments panel when you have one or more attachment there. And then the last two, the third one is really around in context. This is what I talked about earlier, where you have the same issue detail view being used in a number of different places. And in fact, the issue detail view, the one that we've built new, is actually rendered inside Bitbucket as well. So if you click on an issue key that's linked, you can display that. So you'll actually start to see the issue appear in a number of different places, not even just within the Jira context either. And then lastly, this is really cool from a future point of view, is we will start making the issue view a little bit more adaptive. So you'll see a little bit later that we have these set of quick add icons that allow you to add subtasks, add attachments, and things like that. If people are using your app, say they're logging time repeatedly, they're constantly logging time, it's a popular action for them, we want to move that over to make it a top action so that, based on what they're using, your app's getting used more, and it's actually easier to do, right? It makes sense. Like, we should totally lean into that. So the point is that this is a really massive opportunity right now as we redesign the new issue view to take advantage of these new design patterns and extend the Jira issue view, right? Let's go build something. And so finally, the last selling point here, like why would you actually want to do this, is a couple of reasons. The first one being reach, right? If you talk about Jira, people who view the Jira issue view, like that view and issue detail, they do it, 2.7 million people do that every single month. It's one of the most popular pages in Jira, and it's going to get a lot of visibility for your app. This is a great place to extend. The next piece is that there's many different use cases that are going on, right? Jira has a number of different use cases across a wide variety of teams, and so you can hop in there. We have over 4,000 apps today on the marketplace across server and cloud. There's a lot of room to continue to build on that, and we see new apps being created every week. And then lastly, going back to the collaboration piece, we want to think about adding that extra visibility on the issue detail view. It's where people come to work across different roles, different tools, those specialists coming in to complete that work, right? To get that issue to move to done. And so if you can add that extra information from some specific tool or a kind of aggregate of a couple different tools, you can really help fuel that collaboration. That's a huge advantage. And then lastly, if you're thinking about building something, it's a great place to start. It's relatively trivial to get connect up, kind of add a glance item, add a little bit of extra information like you saw with the checklist. Nice use case, relatively easy to do, and it adds a lot of value for teams. So it's a great place to start. All right, so let's dig into how you would actually go about this, and we'll spend most of my time on this. So hopefully you're sold that you definitely wanted to do this. It's just a matter of how would you do it, right? Cool. So on the new issue view, there's 4 extension points. We wanted to make this really, really simple and make this a little bit more semantic on what it means. So you have the issue actions in the top right, you have the issue content, the issue glance on the right for all the context items, and then the issue activity. So 4 spots, 4 ways to extend this, all with their own unique purposes. So let's dive into issue content first. So the issue content, something that's brand new, is we've added these little quick add icons that allow you to tie and tether the iframe below to be able to produce these like actions, right? So you want to add attachments, add subtasks to break down your work. You want to add an envision prototype. It's all about helping describe the work that you need to get done and extending that. So let's take an actual live example here. Same example with Envision. So you have these little quick add icons. You can see Google Drive there as well. So if you click this, it's going to open up your iframe below. And then you can just paste this. This is now an iframe that you control as an app developer. And then when they paste in that URL, you're going to go collect that information, make it a bit interactive. And then now anytime someone else comes to that issue, they're going to see that Envision prototype, right? So if one person does that and adds that context, everyone's going to get access to that, which is really, really nice. So quickly on the design principles for the issue content itself, you want to make sure it's useful. So think about what action you want people to do, or what kind of content are they adding. Try to tether that to the icon at the top. You want to embrace content, so really describe what needs to be done. And then remember to use space wisely. This issue view is naturally responsive, so you don't need to worry about specific sizing and things like that. You just should have your iframe responsive as well. And so when it collapses down, it's going to be a single column, but you should just handle that with kind of responsive development and design. OK. So if you want to use this location, this is what it looks like in your descriptor. So hopefully you've been to a couple talks before. You know that you have to define a descriptor, which is kind of your manifest file. And it says, hey, what do I want to take advantage of within Jira? And you say, yep, I want to add something in the content area. So I'm going to add the Jira issue contents module. I'm going to pass in the parameters that I have, right? The key one here being the URL that you want to specify. And that's going to load the iframe that does all the logic that you want. And so whenever the app gets installed, that's what lets us know to load that iframe below, which is the Envision iframe there. So they've specified what URL is being loaded, and then they take it from there. All right, so there's a couple really cool aspects to this, tying the actual quick add icon and the ability to quickly do these actions, and the iframe below. The first one is the JavaScript Api event. So we actually emit an event that you can listen to. We broadcast this. When a user clicks that quick add icon, we're going to broadcast this event. It's issue quick add clicked event. And you can do anything you want from that. So you could load a modal. You could load your iframe below. You could kick off some random automation process. I'm not sure. It's up to you. And what the JavaScript API actually is, just to take a step back, is it just allows a cross-domain messaging bridge between your app, the child iframe that's being loaded, and Jira, the parent. And so you can listen to events. You can actually use the JavaScript API to pop dialogues, feel a bit native. And that way you don't have to kind of worry about the cross-domain stuff. So I think, so here's a good example. So we have tempo. And it's an iframe below. You have a couple of items that have been logged work on. And let's say you want to log some additional time here. And so inside their iframe, when you click on that, they're actually loading the JavaScript API, ap.dialog, and then they're passing in another iframe, which is their ability to log time. So you actually have a lot of control in this and how you want this to look and how to interact. And the idea that we would like is that when you click that event, it opens up kind of an attachment panel or something to add content. If they do add that content, then you can show the panel below. Otherwise, if they exit out, you wouldn't show the panel, right? Got to be mindful of that. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is what it looks like, right? We just broadcast this event. We tell you if it's the first time they've clicked it or not, so you have a little bit of logic there. This is relatively new, so if you have any ideas or want us to improve that, please come talk to me. We're constantly investing in this area, so we could definitely improve that. So that's the piece there on the JavaScript API and what you can do. Now, conditions I want to talk about a little bit that give you control about when your iframe is displayed. So they kind of go hand in hand with the JavaScript API, where you can kind of control, modals popping up and maybe adding content and things like this. But this is like once content's actually added, this is how you would control that within your iframe. So a condition is it's not unique to the issue view. The conditions themselves are cross-connect, and we just applied it to this module. So condition specifies requirements that must be met for a user interface, i.e. the iframe, to be displayed to a user. And so what do we mean by this? So actually, before I get to that, just a quick reminder, please do not show empty iframes in the content area. It's a lot of space. It takes up a lot of room. And this was like probably the #1 complaint we had from customers in using apps. So if you're mindful about this and you can kind of use the patterns that we're developing, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to load customers shouldn't be able to load 20, 30 apps and use that effectively in the issue detail view. That's the type of scale we were thinking at. So here we have a Google Drive where it's kind of acting like an attachment panel. So if you have a file that you've attached to the issue, you certainly want to show that. So how would you control that, right? Because you may not do that in Jira. You may be in Google Drive and say, you know what, let me just add this to that issue, or you may be in some other app. And so if I associated those two elements together, those two pieces, I would certainly expect it to come to the issue and see that file, right? So how would you actually control this? Well, you do that through conditions. And so just like you had before, you have the Jira issue contents module. You have a set of conditions. And then there's a whole range of options you can use. But you essentially would add a tiny little issue property. So this is just a key value store that allows you to kind of, say you put a Boolean value, right? If it's true, we would show the iframe for you. If it's false, we don't, we hide it. And so you just specify that condition. You can also get a little bit more advanced here within the params, where you can actually set maybe different values. So maybe it's not a true, false, or Boolean, but it's maybe something like it's to do, in progress, done, and you're setting those statuses, right? You can have any number of ways you want to use that. And like I said before, this is a cross-connect. So this is going to be looking at a couple of different ways you can use conditions. So you could say if the user's an admin, maybe they see your iframe. It's a popular one. But most popular is going to be the entity property equal to. And that's because you're using the storage on the issue to evaluate whether to show the iframe or not. OK, so I talked about issue properties. Let me touch on that for a second. So these are within the realm of these entity property ideas that allow you to add key value stores, as I mentioned, on different Jira entities, such as issues and projects. I think boards maybe as well. But for our purposes, we're going to talk about it and call it issue property because we're trying to store data on that issue to reference it later, right? And this is really, really easy. This is just a Node.js example where you're just going to hit the API within Jira, the REST API, if you look at the URL there. And you're going to pass in the issue key that you're referencing, and then the issue property that we talked about earlier, right? So you could say show iframe, and then you would just set that to true. And then anytime someone comes to that issue, we're going to render that iframe for you. So you have complete control on the life cycle for that. But also means you have to control that life cycle. So it's a bit of a trade-off, right? Great. So you can use conditions here to show whether the Google Drive is done. So if someone were to remove that attachment, we would expect you to set also the entity property that they're using to false. And that way the panel would hide itself. And they would use the quick add button at the top to add content again. Right? That's the kind of the flow that we would expect. OK, lastly, this is just a really cool thing that we can do now. You'll start to see this more and more. If you extend this location, we're starting to add in-product places where people can discover your apps and install those right there. I think this is a huge win. So within those little meatballs, you can actually add, so this is available for site admins, and they can add and go select different add-ons to install that take advantage of that location, which is really cool. All right. So the next one is the issue glance. This is probably the other one that's a little bit more complex and has a lot of capabilities. So let's dive into that one. So the quick example, we'll look at checklist again. Here's a live one. So when you hover over that, you can see that you can open that up. And that's going to take over the entire right-hand column and allow you to kind of interact with that. Here we're kind of adding a couple things and selecting that we've done that item. And then you can go back. And so the idea is that you can kind of see this contextual information on the right-hand side while still looking at comments, maybe updating the description, doing something there. So if we look at the anatomy of a glance, there's a couple of different aspects to it, or attributes. The key things being your app name, and then the entity icon, the entity name, and the entity status. So most importantly, what we want people to take advantage of is this entity status, because we've given you such a smaller footprint, right? It is a trade-off. We've given you a smaller footprint, but it's always displayed there. And the idea you want to ask yourself is, okay, what information do I need to display to the user to let them know to click in to this item to do more? So maybe in the checklist example, they should show something like two tasks remaining. That'd be a lot more helpful, whether I should click in on that. And so you have a bunch of different options here. You can use lozenges, badges, icons. This is essentially maybe something you're more familiar with other companies around declarative UIs, where you just tell us through a JSON payload what you want this to look like, and we're going to render that. And the advantage there is that it works across any device, any browser. It's very performant, so we can load that really fast. We're not waiting for the iframe to kind of boot up. We can do that secondary, because there is an iframe behind the glance when you click in. So if we look at this one, if you say, yep, I want to use the glance as a great use case for me, you would use the Jira issue glances module, and then you would pass in a set of parameters. You have a little bit of an icon there, but the main thing being the target URL. Right? That's the iframe that you're going to load once you click into that glance item. And again, we have another API event, the JavaScript API, that we let you know what's happening, but this one's for a slightly different reason. So if I go back to the example, if the issue view has 2.7 million people looking at an issue every month, you're talking hundreds of millions of views a month, right? And you don't want to be loading your iframe and your web resources at that scale, I don't think. And so what this does is that this allows you to basically load additional resources. So every time we load the issue, we're going to load the iframes with it, but on the glance, it's going to be behind it, and so you don't have to load all your web resources on that initial page load, right? You can wait until a user actually clicks on your glance to open it up, and then you can go and fetch the web resources you want. You just add a little loading state, and then that's going to help you be a lot more thoughtful about the resources that you're using and be highly performant. So we think that's a really nice advantage there. The next thing here is just talking about dynamic updates. So one thing we realized is that you certainly don't want to, the little glance summary that you're looking at, that's very dynamic, right? Take a Slack example. You have no idea what Slack room is going to be put up against that issue, or what the icon is for that Slack room, or how many messages. And so you want to be able to adjust that really, really easy. And again, this uses the issue properties. So we've actually added a very specific one, which is status. And so you have your add-on key, your module key, and you hit that issue property, that Node.js example we saw earlier, and you're going to pass in not just a true-false value, but you're going to pass in this little JSON blob. And this is going to be the different options you have. And we've actually opened this up recently where it used to only be the status. So you could only do the lozenges or the badges, but that's kind of bad, because if I've declared new tweets in my descriptor, that's static, and that doesn't really help me dynamically update that. So now you can completely update the whole thing dynamically. So you have the icon, you have the name, and you have the badge, and you can do whatever you want there, or the status at the end. And so you can dynamically update that as you want. So all you do is when an issue loads and your iframe gets loaded, you would just go ahead and just update that issue entity property to set that. Again, you can use conditions as well. So you're seeing a common pattern here we wanted to take advantage of. So you can control which glance to display, and you can use conditions to do so, right? A really common pattern here is maybe you have a couple of different states that you want to display, where you can kind of, depending on what state that person's in, you want to show something different on the entirely different sets of information on the glance, and what they click into is actually different. So the URL behind that glance is different. So you can have like 3 glances in your descriptor, and then you can use conditions on which one do you want to actually show to the user. So when we look at this, just going back really quickly, this is just as simple as setting the conditions with the parameters and using those different states. And so the 2 examples here are one kind of, let's say you have a Git integration, and you want to show different kind of pieces of information, whether they have commits, whether they have pull requests, whether they have builds, and you want to change up those glances. So we would actually have 3 glances here, and we would use conditions on basically if there is an issue with commits, then we would show the commits one. If there's an issue with pull requests, then we would override it and show that one, and so on and so forth, right? The other really cool example is empty states. So we think this is a really nice pattern where you want to tell the user, like, hey, like, get connected, like link up a room or link a conversation in this example. And that's an empty state, and you can direct them to like a nice flow. So if they click into that, they'll have a nice onboarding flow with the iframe. And then once they actually do link a conversation up, you can actually change that glance and then now you're showing the number of conversations or unread messages and kind of giving them an alerting system. So that's a really nice use of that. Yeah, great. So just a quick recap. Glances provide that contextual information about an issue. They're always displayed. However, the caveat at this point in time is that you can only ever show one glance per descriptor, right? So we kind of limit you to, you have a descriptor, you can actually add multiple glances, but we're always going to evaluate to only one. So you can use the 3 or 4, but you always need to evaluate with conditions which one you want to show. Otherwise, we'll kind of do it for you, and it may not be the right one. So that's something to be mindful of. If you have questions on that, please come talk to me. We've kept that simple on purpose, but there's no reason we can't iterate on that and improve it, right? Lastly, you can dynamically set the summary via the JavaScript Api. So it'd be really cool if the checklist example had like, two items still remaining. And then when you click in, it will show the iframe behind it. So you have complete control there. OK. So lastly, I'll wrap up with a little bit at some simpler use cases. So the next one that we'll look at is the issue activity. Now, we didn't really fundamentally update this one from the old issue view. And so the idea here is that you would just use this module called Jira Issue Tab Panels. Has a set of parameters again. And that's going to appear in the dropdown, and you have complete control. We just essentially show that iframe every time. So if someone goes back, they click on work logs, they're going to show your iframe. Now, most people who take advantage of this location today, and if you're building your app, you want to make sure the design has a timeline view. You can certainly do anything you want, but we encourage you to take advantage of that and make it quite consistent. So that one's pretty straightforward. OK, the next one is the issue actions. So this is the meatballs in the top right. And the idea here is you would just use a web items module, and then you would pass in the location that you want to use. Because web items themselves are just kind of like links, and they can do things. So you may put a link or a web item on the project, like the navigator on the left-hand side, right, where you select boards, backlogs, reports. You could put a new item there. This one, you put a new item, and it goes in the issue actions. And most people use this for, you see log time there at the top. That's another way that you can get it adding for tempo. They actually put that up there, and you click on that, and it will open the modal to log time. But we use it for things inside Jira around moving the issue, copying that issue, taking some action on that issue. So maybe automations would be a good place on this. Maybe you wanted to like ping something, recreate it in Trello. Like you can kind of do anything you want there, really. And so that would be nice and extensible there. So those are the other two places, a little bit simpler. OK, so as a quick recap, hopefully you know how to kind of extend it. The value that you're going to get from this is we wanted to be very thoughtful about, we don't want people to add 4 or 5 apps from the marketplace, and it starts to get overwhelming for the whole team. We wanted to really think about what would a design look like if someone had 50 apps installed, right? Why not? And that's certainly something that we've thought about with the design, and we're hoping to work with you on that to be able to control the content area, to control that like life cycle of how that's being built out, to really make a nice user experience that our customers are going to love. The next one is performant at scale. So we do a lot in the background right now with the new issue view to make it a lot faster. We've actually had a lot of performance wins on the new issue view. It's actually faster than the old. And here we actually load a lot of those iframes pretty gracefully. We'll load the initial content, and then the iframes will kind of load in the background. If your iframe is displayed up front, though, and it has content, it'll be one of those first things to be loaded, right? And then you have, like, if you add content and stuff, then that's another way to limit that. The next thing, we thought about this from the very beginning. So we're always looking for feedback. Please hop on the developer community. Talk about what's going on here. Give us your suggestions. Like, we are definitely investing in this area. So we'd love to hear from you on how we can make this even better. The next thing is around building once, and you can use it anywhere. So if you do extend the issue view on the content side, for example, and you add like some prototype or something, that would be available across all the products. Right? It's the same issue view across your service desk, to your core projects, and to your software projects. So it's a huge advantage. And then it's simply powerful. So you have 4 locations you can extend. They each have their own unique aspects and abilities. And so you want to think about, like, okay, what are you trying to do? What's the user trying to accomplish? And help them in the best way. And then lastly, you can really ride Jira's growth on this, right? 2.7 million people view this today. That's going to continue to grow. There's lots of different use cases within Jira itself. And you can help build out that kind of adjacencies, which would be really cool. Cool. And then here's the last recap of the 4 different places you can extend. and then the different modules that are available. So just wanted a quick recap here. So you just pass these modules into your descriptor, load up your iframe, kind of go through the normal connect framework, and then that's going to display on the issue. Then lastly, the other cool stuff that you want to kind of learn more about is using the JavaScript API to effectively dynamically update things on the fly. It's going to be really fast. It makes your app feel native in Jira, so you could actually have the same functionality and the same feeling for a user as the attachment panel does. It's pretty cool. We thought about that, and we're like, why can't we make this more native? And then lastly, on the conditions, we really want to give you that control to help manage what content's there, what the user should see, but please use that responsibly. And then lastly, I just wanted to end with just a full descriptor here. If you haven't actually seen that, if you're a new developer, this is a full manifest file for a Jira, or for an Atlassian Labs app, which is called Who's Looking for Jira Cloud, and it installs a little context item on the right-hand side, and it will tell you, who's looking at this app at the same time you are, is essentially what it does. They're using, this is an old app descriptor, so they're using the old kind of web panels with locations and stuff, and so they don't get advantages on the new glance stuff, so they should probably go update that, right? But so this is like the opportunity that I said before, is like it's a new design model, there's new things to take advantage of, and a lot of people have yet to do that, so pretty excited about that. Cool, and then lastly, here's a Go link, so if you want to take a picture of that really quickly, you can just go to go.atlassian.com/issueview_ecosystem, and this actually lays out all the different design aspects around the design model I talked about, the 4 extension points. You can dig into the modules. You can dig into the API events that get emitted and start to build that out. So with that, I think I've concluded my talk. Hopefully you all enjoyed that. I learned quite a bit. If you have any questions, please come see me. Otherwise, we're actively on the developer community. We've had a lot of really good conversations with app vendors already, and we've had a lot of feedback, and that's informed our design. We will continue to invest in the new issue view. It's going to finish the rollout relatively soon, so we'll be at all Jira products, all Jira customers on cloud, and so this is a great time to get in and build on that, right? And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, Taylor. We actually do have a few minutes. You want to take some questions? Good. Anybody have any questions for Taylor? Here we go. Start right there.
Is there any way to open Jira issue view from the plugin itself?
That is an amazing question. We have not built that yet, but we certainly intend to. That's a great feedback. So just to kind of clarify that a little bit further, you do have some options like the JavaScript API where you can call like ap.dialog, and you can pass that dialog. We are looking at something where you can say ap.viewIssue, and it would load the same modal. I mean, I think it's crazy that we haven't built that yet.
So the issue content button currently has target as web panel only. So is there a way I can open a pop-up without having the web panel in the background?
Yes, so that's a great question. So this is the use case where we're relying on existing Connect framework stuff. So the way that works is we're going to rely on you now to set the condition on whether to show the iframe below. And so when a user clicks that icon, at that point it's not going to display because you haven't set that entity property on that condition to evaluate. And so the idea is you would pop that modal, it wouldn't show the iframe below, and then when you add content, then modal would go away, and then the content would show that piece. Is that kind of the question I think you're getting at?
Yes, yes.
So you need to think about controlling that life cycle. And so you're kind of using the events to kind of, whether you show a modal or it does drop down to the iframe. So for example, if you click subtask in Jira, it doesn't do a modal or anything, it just pops you down. We scroll the user down to the subtask, and then they can open up a subtask.
Yeah, because
so we will scroll you down to the iframe, but you can also use a modal is the other common pattern.
Yeah, because I see the attachment button which we have, so that opens a pop-up, but there is no iframe in the background.
There's what in the background?
Though no iframe, no web panel added in the issue view page for the attachment section, for example.
Yes.
Yes, but when I tried with having a button there, and on click of it, I opened the pop-up using the event, but a web panel was added in the background.
Oh, the web panel was added in the background. Okay,
Yeah.
I will take a look at that, yeah.
Yeah, so I've created a feature issue, I guess.
Yeah, so just to do some historical context there, like we've been rolling this out over time, and we certainly made some, some like decisions that we have changed since.
Yeah.
And one of those was we actually required the user only to click the quick add icon and only ever show content.
Yeah.
And that's pretty insane because like, as the app vendors, like you control whether that content is associated, and you may do it in Google Drive or some other app, and coming to the issue, still requiring the user to do that was just a mistake on our part.
Yeah.
And so we're moving towards where you have complete control on showing that content area,
Yes.
but that also means that we really would like it not to have a lot of empty iframes.
Yes.
And so we need to work on that. So
Yeah.
if it's not in the developer community or a public issue, I may raise one, and then you can follow it there.
Yeah, it's there, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe if you can share something about why do you have only one issue glance? Any thoughts on? Yeah.
I'd love to hear use cases on the issue glance. The idea is that you can put any number of pieces of content behind that iframe. You take over the entire right-hand column, which didn't exist in the old issue view. You actually all kind of there was just a bunch of iframes, and you kind of had to scroll for a while, and it was kind of all there, which is fine, but it really kind of doesn't scale very well. And so the glance is this idea that it's self-contained, it's performant, it loads on mobile, but we're not having multiple glances because we're trying to keep that right-hand sidebar as limited as possible. We're actually going through our own kind of, not struggle, but challenge with tabs and like really advanced screen configurations. People have 50, 60 fields. How do we account for that in just like a really long column? So we need to think about that from a design point of view, and we're certainly iterating. But the glance is there to kept you can probably put 3 different entities, right? You could say like 4 open conversations, like 3 unread, and 2 things. Like you have complete control to summarize that, and we think that that's the best approach there. But we may open that up to maybe 2, 3 glances, but I don't know. We were trying to start simple and then build it out. So.
Here we go. One more question over here.
Actually, 3 quick questions. One is you mentioned that there's a JavaScript API and an event that's received by our JavaScript code, but that our JavaScript code comes from the iframe, but you said that the iframe isn't loaded initially, so I'm confused here.
So the iframe, I see. So the iframe is loaded in the background for the glance, but you're right on the content. But what happens is the iframe is like fetched like as the event's fired, so it actually does that kind of in real time. And so if you just have that iframe specify the URL, you will get notified. Even though it's like not technically there and being loaded like the full web resources, you will receive that event from that iframe that you've loaded on the issue content module.
But it will be hidden at first, as you mentioned. If, for
yes,
example,
but you'll still be able to, you'll still be able to see it because we will load that prior to the event being fired.
Another question is, you mentioned setting a property on an issue to make either a glance visible or an issue content visible. Is that happening only when the issue is loaded, or can it happen at any time through like some WebSocket magic?
So that's something I actually didn't get to because this is kind of more of I think I was aiming more for like if you're thinking about building for the first time. But because of the new issue view is all React based, what's actually happening is we are refreshing the issue anytime a status changes or a field changes, and that's actually going to reload the iframe as well. And so we're going to evaluate that condition every single time, right? So if something changes there and you hit that issue property, you can actually even call set refresh issue. There's a JavaScript event to refresh the issue itself. In the old world, that would like refresh the entire URL and the entire page. Now it just re-renders the React and the virtual DOM, and it just updates the one small item.
And then my question was more the example you shared, which is if you're using, Dropbox integration, and someone added a Dropbox file to somewhere that is linked to the issue. So there is no action in the Jira UI, there is an action somewhere else, and the server code will set the entity property on the issue, which is what you mentioned. Is that going to be caught by Jira, the server code, and sent through some WebSocket or whatever to the browser, any user who's viewing the issue? And
no, I see. So it's not real time. The user would have to refresh that. Eventually, we probably would look at something where we see that the entity property gets updated and then call that refresh issue React. But today, if the user's on it and someone adds it at the same time, they wouldn't see that update in real time and re-render the React virtual DOM. They would have to refresh the page. But any subsequent user would see that. Yeah, it's a great question.
All
Be
right.
a good one to add to the community or public issue.
That's all the time we have for questions for Taylor. So thank you, Taylor.